seeing those boys with their father, they are hugging them and kissing them and holding them. And I specifically remember seeing this boy just like me sitting, but he's sitting on his father's lap and he's holding him, and I was just hit with this pain of like what? Like, what's wrong with me that I don't get that?
Yes. Okay. And what negative words go with that?
It's like I'm invisible.
Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. What you just saw was what some would call conversion therapy. It's often used as a pejorative to imply forcing someone to convert from one orientation to another, usually from gay to straight. The people who practice such therapy, however, don't like to use that phrase, conversion therapy, because like I said, it implies force. What they practice is instead called reparative therapy, or in the instance of what you just saw, reintegrative therapy. It is not forced. It is entirely of the individual's, the patient's free will, his own free choice to eliminate or reduce same-sex attraction, same-sex desires. But there are many, many conversion therapy bans across the country. Right now, approximately 22 states have conversion bans, and then 5 more have partial conversion therapy bans, meaning that, at least for minors, you're not allowed to take your children to go see a therapist if they voluntarily and willingly want to either eliminate or reduce their same-sex attraction. It is illegal. You've got to travel to another state where it is okay. In some cases, adults are not allowed to go get this so-called conversion therapy, because the one thing that you cannot do, according to our elites, according to the powers that be, is you cannot go from gay to straight. You can go from straight to gay. You can go from straight to bisexual, bisexual to intersex, twin-spirited, whatever it may be. That you can do. And in that sense, according to them, gender is fluid. You can do anything you want sexually. Gender is fluid, except go from gay to straight. That you are not allowed to do. That's the one unforgivable offense. And therefore, when those cases happen, success stories of people who've left the homosexual lifestyle and are now heterosexually oriented, perhaps in happy marriages, that narrative must be defeated. It must be censored. It must be suppressed, because people are not allowed, according to the powers that be, to do that. The fact is, many, many thousands do that, and many thousands have done that. In fact, there may even be an exodus from the LGBT lifestyle, but it's very difficult to find the data because the Google search engines, the websites, the media, all suppress or censor that. Once again, is the unpardonable crime, the unforgivable offense, to leave the homosexual lifestyle and lead a happy heterosexual life. I remember some time ago, I interviewed a man named David. This was probably half a dozen years ago. And this was a man who had spent 30 years steeped in the homosexual lifestyle, going to gay bathhouses, hooking up with hundreds upon hundreds of lovers. He said he was so deep into that lifestyle that he was addicted, and that even his fellow homosexual friends were worried about him. That's how deeply addicted he was, how enslaved he was to that lifestyle, to the point where he was just so sick of it that he passed by a Catholic church one day, went inside, knelt before a statue of St. Joseph, and he looked at him and he said, fix this for me, because I can't do it. Get me out of this. Help me. And that's exactly what St. Joseph did. St. Joseph got him out of that lifestyle. He connected him to a good men's group at that church. He got involved. And also, David started going to therapy. And when he went to therapy, it was not to cure him of homosexual desires. In fact, that wasn't even the focus. The focus was dealing with childhood trauma, because he realized that he had suffered a great deal as a child. As a child, he had a very controlling mother who essentially smothered him. He had pretty much no relationship with his father, as well as his grandfather. No love shown, a lot of bullying, a lot of abuse. On top of it, he was a sensitive individual, very artistic, and the boys would make fun of him. He was bullied on the playground. And then add to that mix, he was abused, sexually abused. That's the perfect storm. That is the perfect storm to lead somebody like that into the homosexual lifestyle. So as he's going to this therapy and he's dealing with his childhood trauma and healing from it and forgiving all the people he needed to forgive, he said that on its own, naturally, spontaneously, he actually started to feel attraction to women, something he had not felt in decades, and that his same-sex attraction was beginning to become reduced. It was less and less desirable to him. Again, this wasn't the focus of his therapy at all. The focus of therapy was healing from childhood trauma and forgiving and overcoming the pain and dealing with it. But as a result, as a corollary of this therapy, he started, like I said, spontaneously feeling attraction to women, such that he actually started to go on dates. And he felt peace. He felt peace as a Catholic. He felt restored and whole. And that's what the media, that's what the powers that be in the elites do not want you to know about so-called conversion therapy. In my next segment, Father Paul Sullins, an expert in this area of research, who has data that may be very surprising to you. Stay tuned. I hope you're enjoying the show. No, this is not the part where I tell you the rest of the show is behind the paywall. In fact, I'm hoping to make all my episodes free. If you haven't signed up for our email, please do so by visiting stellamaris.media and signing up. I've got a number of projects I'm excited about at Stella Maris Media, but we are entirely self-funded. So if you are able to give, go to stellamaris.media and click on Support Our Work. Thanks so much for watching, and back to the show. Father Paul Sullins is a senior research associate at the Ruth Institute. Before that, he was a professor of sociology at the Catholic University of America, where, among other things, he specialized in same-sex parenting and the impact that it has on children. He's done lots of work on clerical sex abuse. He's published many books, many articles. In fact, his credentials are far too long for me to list on the show, but they're very impressive. Father Sullins, it is great to speak with you again. Welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be with you today, Christine.
Your latest work involves researching conversion therapy bans and the research in which they're based. What is conversion therapy in the first place?
Well, that's a disputed question, so it's a good thing that you asked. What we actually study in the research is something called sexual orientation change efforts, SOCE, which is a term or an acronym that was coined by the American Psychological Association to cover the wide range of activities that people engage in when they're troubled with having same-sex attractions, or as they would put it, if they're disturbed about their sexual orientation. And so these activities range from individual retreats and prayer to camp experiences for young people, to different kind of interventions in religious settings, and also to traditional therapy and psychotherapy all across the board. They call it SOCE, social orientation change efforts, because they don't want to use the term therapy. The term therapy implies that something may be amiss and being improved or cured, so they don't want to say that. Now, they also, however, contradictorily, include in that a thing they call conversion therapy. So conversion therapy, by definition, is a therapeutic intervention which has a goal to change someone's sexual orientation, usually from homosexual to heterosexual. And the APA and other groups will tell you that this is harmful and that it's never effective. And so at the center of all of these efforts is this thing they call conversion therapy, which almost no one does anymore. It used to be done several decades ago, when people thought that there was some sort of psychological basis for homosexuality and that it was preferable to be heterosexual. And regardless whether you think that or not, today, most persons who help persons with same-sex attraction, even in religious settings, don't set out as a goal to change sexual orientation. They set out as a goal to help someone live an authentic, committed, faithful, holy life, whatever that means, whatever changes or doesn't change. That's something that's open. And so we have conversion therapy, which is focused on sexual orientation change, but then we have a wider range of efforts which don't prohibit sexual orientation change, but don't necessarily have as a goal to change that. Now, that's a long and complicated answer, but it's a kind of a undefined, messy area.
Sure. And I know the phrase conversion therapy is used as a pejorative, largely in the media. And as we know, there are many states that have conversion therapy bans for minors. But you've taken a look at the research, and one of the reasons why some of these states have passed these conversion therapy bans is they claim that so-called conversion therapy leads to a higher rate of suicide. Is that true?
No, that is definitively not true. And that is a recent claim. In 2009, the APA reviewed the research. There was a lot of pressure on them to opt for a ban on conversion therapy because it induced suicidality, among other harms. They concluded that the evidence didn't show that there was not sufficient evidence to show that it was harmful. In the 10, 12 years following 2009, there was a concerted effort to try to find evidence that conversion therapy induced suicide. And there were in 2020, actually 2019 and 2020, there were 4 studies that claimed to use population data to show evidence of this fact. The strongest one used a random sample of LGBT persons in the United States, a very strong sample with lots of statistical power, and claimed to show that LGBT persons who had been to conversion therapy were twice as suicidal on a number of measures than those who had not been. When I reanalyzed that finding, however, I found that they had committed a fundamental error in the analysis, and that is that they failed to exclude suicidality that was expressed before the person had gone to conversion therapy. So if we're measuring, let's say, suicidal ideation, which is you report that I have thoughts of suicide, they would take not only the thoughts of suicide that someone reported after they'd been to conversion therapy, but also before conversion therapy. And they'd say, look, this person is twice as suicidal. When I looked at the data, however, I found that 65% of the thoughts of suicide that people going to conversion therapy reported happened before they went to the therapy, not after the therapy. And so what's really happening is that these persons are more suicidal before they go to the therapy, but after they go to the therapy, they're much less suicidal than those who had never had the therapy in the first place. In fact, they're only a fourth to a third as suicidal following the therapy. So it is let's just say a myth or a falsehood. I don't want to say it's a conscious deception, but it bears some of the marks of conscious deception to say that persons who have been to conversion therapy are more suicidal. It's a lie.
So if conversion therapy, as you know, actually helps children, decreases the rate of suicide, then why does the media present the opposite picture, and why do states continue to ban this practice?
Right. Now, let me qualify what I've said. Conversion therapy doesn't necessarily make youth, that is minors, less suicidal. It doesn't make them more suicidal, but it doesn't make them much less suicidal. Most of the suicide reducing effects is on adults.
Okay.
So adults who go to conversion therapy are much benefited by that. Why are there bans on adults going to conversion therapy? Because legislatures and people who make these decisions buy the false narrative that conversion therapy is somehow harmful. The reason they put these bans on young people going to conversion therapy is well, there are several reasons. One, they believe that it's harmful. It could induce suicide. Two, they believe that if someone identifies as having same-sex attraction, then that person is ontologically LGBT. That is who they are. You hear them say often, oh, they've discovered who they are. And if someone tries to change from same-sex attraction, they will say, oh, you're trying to deny who you are or somehow change who you are. They believe that's impossible to do. And so trying to do this impossible thing for a young person is to court harm for them. And so it's not an empirical claim at all. It's not a scientific claim. It's really an ideological or an ontological claim. You see this in a lot of the studies where they will admit in the subsequent discussion of the study, well, even if the harm isn't what we think that it is here, it's still doing harm to persons to try to get them to live in what they will call a heteronormative life when they really are homosexual and should rejoice in being homosexual.
Isn't it ironic that these states, they don't trust minors? Now, minors who voluntarily want to go to these therapy sessions, who really want to eliminate same-sex attraction. I'm not talking about minors who are forced into it. I'm talking about, kids who really want to get rid of these same-sex attractions. They want to go to this therapy. They're not allowed to go because it's breaking the law. Isn't it ironic, however, that multiple states, some of the same states, are allowing children of the same age to go and change their gender if they want, take puberty blockers, even undergo sex change surgery?
That's right. And if those children that are headed towards sex change surgery express reluctance about that and say, well, maybe I should wait, maybe I should go into some therapy, they'll even say to those children, oh, no, it's not good for you to do that. It's better for you to go ahead and transition. They're against GICE, gender identity change efforts, just as much as they're against sexual orientation change efforts. Because in both cases, that relieves the person from having to submit to kind of the gender ideology. Even though they sound contradictory, we're not going to believe the young person on the one hand, but we're going to believe them on the other hand, in the other case. But really, they're both allied in that a person is asserting or trying to assert the freedom to be free of sexual orientation ideology or to be free of gender identity ideology and to make their own choices about what kind of changes they want to engage. And in both cases, what's on the other side of this is a religious belief. Persons who have religious commitments that are inconsistent with changing the sex that you were born with or the sexual attractions that go with your phenotype. They believe that persons who are discordant with those physical realities really have an alternate ontology and should live that out and be encouraged to do that, and not be encouraged to reconcile with their vision of the natural law or of their philosophical ideals or their religious commitments that call them to conform their desires to some other reality.
Right. Now, do we have data on the success rate of so-called conversion therapy? I know that there are organizations like Dr. Joseph Nicolosi's organization that uses reintegrative therapy. You've got Exodus International, you've got PFOX, you've got all sorts of organizations. And it's really difficult to find any accurate numbers because, of course, you go onto Google or any web search engine and the results are completely skewed. I mean, these like you said, there's an ideology behind it. And media and the elites don't like this idea of people leaving the homosexual lifestyle, so they will suppress search results. It's almost impossible to find data really on the success rate of this.
You're absolutely right. If you go to Google, they're not going to tell you the truth about this, but the research is there. I've done some of it myself. It's pretty clear. In fact, it's pretty consistent. I'll tell you about it in a minute, but where you can find it is to go to the website of the Ruth Institute. That's ruthinstitute.org, and they have a resource page on this topic, and they have some of my studies and some of the other studies that I'm about to mention. So the first study, I should say, a strong study of sexual orientation change efficacy, that is whether and to what extent it works, was done in 2003 by Dr. Robert Spitzer. Spitzer is a preeminent psychologist at the time. He was the chair of the committee of the American Psychological Association that was in charge of sexual minority research, and he oversaw the development of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the American Psychological Association. So he was a top-notch scholar, and he became intrigued by the fact that some persons who formerly had identified as gay now identified as ex-gay, and claimed that they had a different set of attractions and behaviors. And so he gathered together a sample of such persons and analyzed it and studied it. And he reported that about 60 to 65% of persons who claimed to have changed sexual orientation were benefited by the effort. They didn't all change to an ultimate extent. So let me explain that when we study sexual orientation, we operationalize it in terms of three dimensions. The dimension of attraction, which is what most people think of, and that's who you're attracted to, whether you're attracted to men or to women. But there's also the dimension of behavior, who you actually have sex with, men or women. And then there's the dimension of identity, what you call yourself. And the working committee of the US government, which is populated by all the major LGBT advocacy agencies, has developed this method for measuring sexual orientation in populations. So Spitzer applied those criteria and found that persons can change at different rates. They don't always change attraction to the extent that they'll change behavior or the extent that they'll change identity. In fact, these three dimensions rarely align up, even in persons who are securely homosexual in their identity. Only a minority, less than a third of persons who express any one of these also express all three of these dimensions, right? So it's kind of a fluid set of characteristics.
Right.
So Spitzer found that if you want to define success as a complete change from homosexual identity and behavior and attraction to heterosexual identity, behavior, and attraction, that was achieved by only about 17% of persons that he interviewed. But if you want to define it in terms of a partial movement, so it's a reduction of same-sex attractions or an increase of opposite-sex attractions, or the ability to engage in an opposite-sex relationship while you still have some level of same-sex attractions, and so some lesser partial change. That was about 60 to 65% who achieved that. Then there was a series of studies by team Jones and Yarhouse, who actually did longitudinal measures of change over time, but came up with very similar results. Only about 20%, 1 in 5 persons could change fully, and something over half could change partially. And then in 2021, I did a study with Dr. Christopher Rosick of a sample of persons who had undergone SOCI. And we discovered pretty much the same thing. In our study, 17%, I think we've got the same number as Spitzer, reported a complete change. We called it a remission from homosexual orientation. And then about 65% reported a partial change. And so the answer is yes, people can change sexual orientation. It does have a positive effect, but most people don't. And it's not easy to do so.
Those are good numbers, though. And that's something that you never hear in the media. It seems, just studying people I've interviewed, I've watched testimonies, of course, of people who claim to be ex-gay. And a lot of the research seems to show that not all of it necessarily, but a lot of it can be traced back to some sort of childhood trauma. Sometimes there's abuse. Many times it has to do with either the absence of a father figure or, a bad father figure. Things like perhaps a controlling mother. There seem to be certain similar themes involved in the lives of homosexuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've known this since the 1960s. This is the psychodynamic ideology of homosexual attractions, which was the prevailing theory through the mid-1980s and was fairly successful in helping persons to reconcile or change sexual orientation. Now, I must say that when I talk about helping persons, it was mostly men that it helped. Most of the fixed orientation to persons of the same sex occurs in men. And in women, it's much more fluid. There's not as much struggle to change sexual attractions or orientations or behaviors. So for men, what those who have worked in the area and helped numbers of men have found is that there is almost always a early family situation where there is a too distant relationship with his father and a too close relationship with his mother, or some combination of those. And this kind of therapy has been done for decades. It's still ongoing. It still helps lots of persons. It is behind Joseph Nicolosi's reintegrative therapy, although he does a number of other things. But with Joseph Nicolosi Sr., it was at the center of his practice and at the center of a number of other persons who do conversion therapy or therapy that's at least open to sexual orientation change. Now, there are a number of good books on this that you can't often find on Amazon or other sources. You can usually find them, by the way, on Books A Million, which is not as restrictive as Amazon, but you can find books by Joseph Nicolosi about homosexuality, particularly about how to raise children in such a way that they're not going to be prone to homosexuality. And then I recommend also Brian Chen's book. He's from Singapore, but he's published two good books on the psychodynamic idea of homosexuality and how to address it lovingly in people, particularly in religious settings. And his books are called The Unaffirmed Core is the first one, and the second one is Reaffirming the Core. And you can find those books on the web, and you can get them from him.
Excellent. Father, your work is invaluable, and it takes quite. You're confronting unpopular and controversial topics, and you're doing so with courage. And so, like I said, your work is invaluable. I appreciate it very much. Where can people go to find out more?
You could go to the website of the Ruth Institute, ruthinstitute.org, and find their resource page on this topic. It's excellent and comprehensive. It has all my studies. It also has some videos and other media that you can get up to speed on this information very quickly. Often, what prompts people to think about these things are a family member, a loved one, often a child, who it comes out as having same-sex attraction or wants to say that I'm identifying now as homosexual or gay. And so there are some really great books available that you can find on the website about that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Father. And before we go, would you mind giving me and our audience a blessing?
Yes, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I ask, Father, that you bless everyone in the sound of my voice right now. Give them the graces that they need for this moment and this day, and guide them further and further into your kingdom. We receive and thank you and ask you for this blessing in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you so much, Father. Very insightful discussion. God bless you.
God bless you, Christine.
Father Sullins is doing work that very few other people are, and God bless the Ruth Institute for hosting and featuring his work. Like I said, it is crucial, and very few people are doing it, so it's courageous that they're taking this on, this very taboo topic. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube censors this video, because it's one of the things that notoriously YouTube does not like people talking about is conversion therapy. If I am censored, you can find me on Rumble. I have a channel on Rumble. And also, we are on Spotify. So look for Forward Boldly on Spotify under my channel, Christine Niles. And of course, if you've not yet done so, please help me to grow my channel. It helps the algorithm if you like and subscribe, and also share my videos to help the light of truth get out there. Because as you know, we are a minority voice. You know, very few people are out there talking about these sorts of things. And our society is absolutely overrun with corruption, with evil, with darkness. And we need to be those points of light. We need to bring the light of truth to the world. So please help me do so by sharing these videos and liking and subscribing. If you're able to do so, go visit stellamaris.media, my website, stellamaris.media. If you're able at all to give to help me continue this work, I've got a number of projects in the works in addition to Forward Boldly. Thank you so much. And if you're not able to, then please do pray for me. In the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.